Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew. As always, that's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, which is a bit echoey this time because I'm on location for this one, sounds exciting, is, as the title suggests, to talk of the stories of film. And I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, release stories, all those ingredients that go to make the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films I tend to cover on this podcast have more of a mainstream leaning to them than anything else. The films I'm interested in or invested in to some degree. I try not to do snark, I try not to punch down. This podcast is very much a celebration of cinema and an appreciation of just how hard it is to make a film. As I said at the start, this is one of my special episodes of the podcast, which is why I'm away from my usual recording base. And here it's a special where I'm talking to a pair of filmmakers about their latest release. And in this case, I'm talking to director Matthew Warchus and screenwriter Dennis Kelly about the newly released Roald Dahl's Matilda, the musical movie, which is playing in UK cinemas now and is heading to Netflix around the world at the end of the year. Now, the pair, as you hear, as you're about to hear, were in fine form. Just a couple of little notes just ahead of me playing you my chat with them. First of all, Dennis Kelly, I mentioned the TV series Utopia a couple of times. He is the screenwriter of the original Channel 4 series Utopia that was taken to America as well. Utopia notably ended after 2 seasons in the UK, with a 3rd season planned that would have wrapped the story up, but never happened. I also mentioned the wonderful film Pride, which I've covered on a previous episode of the Film Stories podcast. That was directed by Matthew Warchus, so I'm going to bring that up. There's one little edit where I cut out an F-bomb just to get this podcast the kind of nice rating that means I can release it all around the world. If you leave a naughty word in, I think there's about 60, 70 countries who won't take your podcast. There's a bit of trivia for you. And at one stage, the pair discuss, they just drop in the name of a tool called Pix, P-I-X. And what this is, it's basically an online review system for filmmakers to share cuts of a film, to share footage nice and securely. And so that comes up at one stage as well. But I think that's all the preamble you need, really. The film is based on Roald Dahl's book, Matilda, and then in turn based on the musical of that book that Warchus, Kelly and Tim Minchin put together. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a clip from the trailer for the new movie, and then we'll go straight into my conversation with the pair. Without further ado, here's just a taste of what the film sounds like.
When I grow up. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who was trapped. This is the story of her great escape.
Matilda, my name's Miss Honey.
Miss, it's hurting my head.
Is maths your favourite thing?
What I really like is reading. It's like a holiday in your head.
Your mind, Matilda. Your parents must think they've won the lottery with a child like you.
Oh, yeah, they just love me at home. Do you want to hear about my first day at school?
Yeah, I'd rather eat vegetables.
Now get to bed, you little bookworm.
We're told we have to do what we're told, but surely... Mrs. Phelps, where's the revenge section? Sometimes you have to be a little bit naughty.
Where's my hat?
So that was a clip from, I think it's called Roald Dahl's Matilda the Musical is the title we're going with for the film version. I'm delighted to be joined by its screenwriter Dennis Kelly and its director Matthew Warchus for this Film Stories podcast special. How do we find you both?
Very well, thank you.
Pretty
Happy
good.
to be here.
Pretty good, yeah.
Okay. So Matthew, can I start with you? Not least because I need to differentiate the voices because this is only going out as audio. I spoke to you around the release of the wonderful Pride, of which an amazing film that I still adore. And you said at that point that already at this point the idea of doing a Matilda musical film was in your mind, but you couldn't release it until 2019. That you were adamant that there was that date in there. Can you just? I presume that's just a simple rights story in the midst there, but I just wonder if you can just fill in the gap of why it was so determinant that it was that year was the earliest you could go.
Well, there was an agreement with the Royal Shakespeare companies to do with the life of the stage show as well, and to make sure that the stage show had a good run before the film came along, because it can go two ways with films of stage shows. And so I think that was the agreement. I was never really involved in that agreement. I just, but that was the thing in the background. But it turned out to be, perhaps more interestingly than just the rights agreement, it turned out to be quite a good period of time for Dennis and I. I think we both feel that the longer period of thinking time and just it changed the relationship we had with the material. So you can imagine for the first few years after the stage show opened, that was the only version of Matilda we could possibly imagine in a way.
Yeah.
Each year that went by, it became more possible to let go of some of those things or imagine translating them into a film version. So it was really helpful, that gap in the end.
Well, go into that a little bit. Dennis, you gave an interview in The Guardian, I think it was back in 2013, and you said if Matilda closed tomorrow, you'd still have to work. But if it continues for 15 years, you might not have to. And I just wonder, I'm just trying to work the dates. You've got 6 years to go.
That's where my mind was.
So you've got 6 years. If you manage this, then you get to the point, George Clooney post Batman and Robin. You never have to work again.
I'm just clinging on with my fingernails. I think I might have been a little naive back then. So.
I do wonder, though, if the success of it, going to a little bit to what Matthew just said, does it liberate your choices a little bit when you've got that that bedrock of tried and tested success on it?
As regards making the film, or as regards I mean, I don't think it does. I mean, I think so often this, you make something from your stage play, and what can happen is if the thing is a success in that medium, it can really get into your head, and you can go, well, we know what we're doing. It's all fine. It's all but actually you kind of got to not do that. You've got to unlearn everything, and you've got to sort of start again, and you've got to look at every bit of it and go, okay, that worked on stage. Is it going to work on screen? And I hope we've done that. I think Matthew's very good at doing. Matthew's better at doing that than me, because he's so analytical, and I think he's better at sort of going. He's better at sort of being brutal with stuff, but I'm not bad at it. I think I've learned to be sort of brutal over time. But I think the success of it on stage is actually it's useful, because you've got material that people like, but it's also dangerous because it can lull you into a false sense of security. And there's films that come out all the time that are based on successful plays or books, and they just don't work, and so you've got to push against that, I think.
I mean, Matthew, one of the things you just said in there was basically is something that I think's eradicated a lot from films: the eradication of thinking time, even in edits now, because it's all gone so digital. You can get from A to B a lot quicker. But the other thing, I mean, tying into that slightly, the other thing with the interviews you've done for your films, you did this with Pride as well, is you sat side by side with Stephen Beresford and were absolutely insistent that you're in the same room as the writer. A lot, and I'm assuming that's the same again. I mean, the two of you are looking at me now, and you don't seem to be fighting particularly. You do seem to be.
Wait till the camera's off.
Well, yeah, no, I get that. I mean, we've got the leaked footage that we'll put out later. But it's an unusual relationship for film, and it's unusual that you put that thinking time in there. And I wonder if you can just talk to the value of that a little bit.
Well, that's the theatre background. So with spending so many years directing plays, I'm used to the script being everything. And and I think it wouldn't occur to me to have on Pride, or in this case on the Matilda musical film, for the actors to be ad-libbing or changing the script on the day in any way. It just doesn't work like that. So the words in this in Dennis's screenplay are really carefully thought through, and not only the words, the structure and the form of it. So I think that would be we worked very closely for a long period of time. And by the way, we had even more time than we thought we were going to have, unfortunately, in most senses. Fortunately, in very few, with the lockdown. And because that put the shooting date back and gave us another 9 months of prep time as well. And the screenplay and the choreography and different things that changed quite a lot in that time. Again, so will continue to change. So anyway, I think that I really do. I kept in close touch with Dennis all the way through filming, and I really do need the script. I use the script. I rely on the script as being an anchor for the whole project. So.
It's interesting about it changing during lockdown. I think Baz Luhrmann gave and Tom Hanks gave some interesting interviews about their Elvis film, which turned out to be an incredibly different beast the other side of lockdown than if they'd shot it right at the start. Was it nuances that were changing in that time, or was it just like was it just the extra thinking time allowed you just to tune things?
It was probably nuances, but I think it's. You said that time, there is usually not much time making a film, and I think that we would have been rushing. We would have been in the normal crazy rush. And had that forced delay, and so it just put the brakes on and allowed us to work in a more measured way and to think things through. I can't remember any because there were so many different drafts, weren't there? But I can't remember in that period exactly what changed, whether there's a specific pivotal thing.
I think it's hard, because it's like every time you come to do a new draft, you're hoping that you're going to get closer to what it is that's you're trying to make, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you go in the other direction, and there's this thing that you can't sort of substitute. There's an element that you can't substitute, and it is time. And I've had this experience with a lot of things where you kind of think, oh, we can do it because we all know what we're doing, and I'm working with really talented people, blah, blah, blah. But you don't give it enough time. And I think that time thing is, I don't know, your brain works in really weird ways. And sometimes you need 4 months to be able to you're looking at exactly the same thing in exactly the same way. But, 3 months later, you suddenly see what's wrong with it. You know what I mean? And so that time can be really, really useful. And there were definitely moments towards the end where I think we kind of, I can't remember what they were, but they were kind of like aha moments of.
Yeah, I remember changing Miracle a lot.
Miracle.
We did. Gave us the other thing that we were able to do is do animatics for nearly the whole film. I mean, almost the entire film was made in an animatic form.
Interesting.
Over that time and over that period, which literally more than 90% of the film, I think. So and that helped. So I've got various different animatic versions of Miracle. I also did what I did on Pride, which is I made a radio play recording of it, and just used it as an audio recording. And I added music and sound effects and things to that audio recording, so I could walk around with it in my ears as an audio screenplay for a long time as well. And of course, the animatics tied with that means I could drop in animatics to my audio track and have a sort of visual and audio mock-up of the film on my laptop.
The other aspect of time that you've talked about there, as someone who sat through a lot of screen musicals that have comfortably breezed past 2 hours and been utterly reverential to what they've put on stage before, you've been relatively brutal here in how I've seen the musical lots of times on stage. And I mean, it almost feels like nothing was sacred in terms of chopping this up and starting again. Can you talk two things there? Number one is you mentioned drafts, and I'm curious just how many there were, but also you've got this in under 2 hours, and there's blatantly a 3-hour version that you could have put out there. And if that was kind of ring fenced from the start.
Well, on the running time, there was actually an agreement early on with Sony for it to be 2 hours or less.
Right, okay.
I wasn't completely aware of that at the time. But in a way, when I did become aware of it, which was before I was editing, I thought this makes sense, actually.
Yeah.
So you always want to tell the story, actually, in as brisk a way as possible, I think. It's supposed to be for all the family. That includes, older people as well as younger people. And so you don't want everyone to have to be sitting there for 3 hours really in an entertainment. And it's hard though with musical because you've got to time for the songs and time for the dialogue, and they both need, to do their thing. So musicals are very crowded. This is why they're often so long. Yeah. There's a lot going on. But yeah, so I think I did want it to be as short as it could possibly be. The first cut, actually, the first assembly was 2 hours, just under 2 hours 20. Okay. So it wasn't enormously, over time. Yeah. And that's. But in terms of your broader point about was nothing sacrosanct, it's not only in terms of the what would be cut and what wouldn't be cut, because actually those were very difficult decisions and quite painful decisions, because we did shoot everything that you have seen on stage in terms of the shots. That we shot them all, and they were all really, really good. So whether they're in the film or not, the performances in those moments were great. So that's hard, and maybe I don't know. You can argue about whether it would be worth adding another 5 or 10 minutes in order to have things in. And I think you sort of ponder that. You don't stop pondering. I don't stop pondering that. I don't even think it's necessarily like the definitive version of the film. That's the other thing. Right. Okay. You just have a version of the film which you sort of agree seems right in most respects. But the other thing about the sacrosanct thing is that there's a good example, I think, is you would have thought, well, we would have thought, and I don't know about can't speak for the audience, that it was impossible to do When I Grow Up in a different way from how it's done on stage, because it's a kind of iconic moment. And it was interesting looking at these iconic moments, and saying, is there another way, or would it even be any good? Would it be would the moments of real sort of gold, if you like, on stage translate into film? Or if you want them to have a comparable emotional impact, what do you have to do to change them? So you do have to take quite a arm's length sort of approach in order to do best work, actually.
I think one thing that helped us though was that the stage version, as a sort of a stage play, as a stage musical, it's incredibly theatrical. It's sort of in a way that a lot of pieces of theatre feel kind of quite fourth wall. They feel quite sort of like films, but with a bit of theatre thrown in. But I think our stage play is quite a theatrical thing. So there was a whole bunch of stuff that just wouldn't work on stage, on screen. We had to. So When I Grow Up just had to be rethought, because it's an amazing moment on stage when kids swing out at you and everyone, you can feel that sort of gasp in the audience where you feel like people are swinging above you. It's just not going to work on screen. So that sort of theatricality in a way helped. I mean, that's. I think Matthew's right. There wasn't really anything that was sacred, but you had the songs as sort of like, the songs kind of, they are the songs, you know what I mean? You can't really, you need to put those songs in, and we knew that from the beginning. And that actually that gave you some really good anchor points, but it also made it really difficult as well, because some of those songs are very theatrical, and so you had to sort of find ways to write around those songs and sort of pull it all together. So it was quite a task. But I mean, I think that nothing is sacred thing was sort of important, and everything was. We were willing to be brutal. I think everything was going to be on the block if we needed it.
Are you going to go full on Michael Mann and keep tinkering with the film for like the next 20 years and putting up different cuts? Is that? No. I mean, something like the telly song, for instance, on stage, incredible. Presumably that in part on the stage play is it's in and around the interval, and trying to structure that in. I was trying to work out just why bits and bobs have moved in and around, but then I kind of accept. Yeah.
Well, that was in the first scene of the stage show originally. Yeah. First time we met Mr. Wormwood, and but it's slowing down the momentum of us getting towards Naughty. Actually, the song Matilda's first song. So then it got moved to the interval.
It didn't. It got cut. Actually, it got cut, and then we had an idea that Paul Kay was originally Mr. Wormwood, and like he's the loveliest person in the world, Paul Kay. And I think he was kind of devastated that he didn't have a song. And I think we sort of had the idea. We had this bizarre idea to put it in the interval, but we were going to put it upstairs. Do you remember? We were going to put it somewhere else in the theatre.
Yeah.
It was going to be like somewhere else in the theatre. And gradually, I think Paul managed to sort of worm it down onto the stage in front of everyone. And that's so it does actually start. It sort of kind of half starts the interval. Not everyone's quite ready when this guy interrupts everything to sort of start the song. So it's got quite a journey, that song.
And we were going to do Stephen Graham's version of it in the end credits for the film.
Yeah,
and we shot it with that in mind. But in
amazing
the end,
amazing teeth.
Yeah, great. The emotional place that the audience is hopefully at by the end of the film meant that it didn't really necessarily want to put any gags in the end credits. So.
Yeah, I'm deliberately not talking about how you've reworked the ending of it because I want people to discover it. But what a moment. But I do want to talk about the end credits because I'm one of those film nerds who reads end credits. And ordinarily now, if I'm sat reading the end credits, the great big block of names that you see is visual effects people from around the world. I don't think I've seen such an endless cast list once you put in all the dancers and all the performers that you've got on this. I mean, it went on forever. And it reminded me that when you came to make Pride, Matthew, you were very sticking to your guns that you wanted a big cast. You were happy to have fewer setups, if memory serves, and you would do wider shots to accommodate more of the cast. But I just wonder, as the canvas for this was clearly going to be bigger, was it crucial to you that so many human beings on a soundstage was your best visual effect?
Well, most of those names would be children, probably.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Millions of them. How do you cope?
Well, there's actually nearly 300 children, and there's two reasons for that. When I was working with Ellen Kane, the choreographer, on the musical numbers, and we were trying to conceive, and with Dennis as well, we were conceiving what those numbers would be. It became apparent that some kids in the film would need to be able to dance like this, and others would need to be able to do tumbling and parkour, and others were important that they were primarily great singers. And so there's a mixture of different skill bases, and instead of a smaller group of kids doing everything, we had sort of specialist kids in there as well. Also, the other thing that happened is when we found the location for Cruncham Hall, the school, and we were looking at lots of different places, and we found this big old Jacobean building that had been a police academy, and it became apparent that that school would have to have a lot of kids in it. It was not a little local village school with 50 kids in it. You would have to populate that school sometimes in it, and it would have certain, a lot of classrooms, a lot of corridors, and it was a big deal. And so at that point, we realized as well that there needed to be more people in the sequences, and particularly the dance sequences when all of the kids come together. So, and I think the only other time there's a lot of people who are not kids is in the opening number Miracle.
Yeah.
And that was an opportunity to actually get a lot of people from musical theatre into the film, people who'd been in the cast of the stage show and other shows that I've done. And that I really wanted that to be very busy and kinetic, and you could have done that opening number like we do on stage with just about 12 adults, but we wanted it to be a world. He starts off the novel saying all parents, generally speaking, universally, parents are like this and have these feelings about their children. And so in a film it's possible to make that sort of generalized comment about universality by having just loads of people.
So I'm showing my kids at the moment Vintage Grange Hill, and Vintage Grange Hill has no more than 15 children in every classroom, and every corridor scene is 4 people on a BBC budget, presumably going through Television Centre to some degree. In this one, I mean, the bit where I realised I was absolutely slap bang in the middle of a film, and the stage show completely gone out of my mind, was the school song. And the absolute blistering energy of that. So I want to ask you about that, because clearly that in part was influenced by the location that you found for it, and I'm fascinated by the animatic setup that you were just talking about there. Can you talk about the planning just of that sequence for me in as nerdy a way as possible? What it looked like in script form, and how you translated that into such a fast-moving, kinetic musical number?
Well, that was
It's really hard, that one.
yeah.
I figured it was. That's why.
There were lots of different versions of that.
Yeah.
On stage, it's based around school gates.
Yeah.
And we immediately thought that would be too static and too limiting. So we very early on, and I say it was Dennis and I, and then after that it was me, Dennis, and Ellen together. But we were trying to work out how to get the alphabet in and a journey.
Yeah.
And had lots of different versions of traveling. I wanted to be traveling. I wanted as much of the film to be traveling and on the move as possible.
Yeah.
And so that was a kind of given. But no, in no way, by the way, was it related to the location at all.
Okay, yeah, I saw you pull a face when I said that, so I figured we were coming back to that. I picked up the clues.
Oh, yeah. Because there are no gates there, we had to build the entrance gates to the hall in front of the building, and 2 sets of gates. So they were added because of the song. And then inside, we built on the soundstage, we built the corridors and the classrooms, and the journey through the school because of the song. So we decided we storyboarded what the journey was going to be.
Yeah.
Then asked Ellen how many steps she'd be doing in that amount of time for each phrase, and how fast. And then we workshopped with kids to see how fast they would travel to the music.
Yeah.
Changed the tempo of the music a little bit, and once we set the tempo, we had a measurement, and then the designers built a corridor to that length and put a door where it needed to be to hit that bar of music.
This is Sam Mendes making 1917, isn't it?
I did think about that.
It was really hard, actually, because do you remember there were like little vignettes in the thing, like the tempo was sort of ruled what we could do, because initially we'd put in like, I'd written in these little vignettes where it suddenly stops, you open the door and there's like a teacher in there speaking, like, and all the kids are like tearing their hairs out, or like you open another door and there's just a kid screeching their nails slowly down the black, like just to sort of heighten the. And then when we started moving it, we realized we had no time whatsoever for anything, so all those had to go in the bin. And the tempo of the thing just kept, when all of your ideas about stuff, that's all great, but a song has a beat, it has a limited amount of time, and it will move, faster than you want it to. So
that's a very interesting thing about filming songs, which I hadn't done before.
Yeah,
this is going to sound stupid. I can't think of a non-stupid way of saying this.
Go for the stupid one.
Or even whether I can express it at all. But the lyrics are a given, and who is singing those lyrics is given. So if you want the lyrics to appear on screen, you want someone's mouth singing the lyrics on screen as opposed to the back of their head or a wide or something like that, then the camera's got to be in a certain place at a certain part of the song on a certain person.
Yeah.
And so it changes your whole approach to coverage, because there's no way the camera can be over there if the person is looking in that direction. Or if the camera is over there, the person can't be looking in that direction. So these very, very like railway tracks that you're on, and you have to. That's why, us with our phones, we rehearsed the musical numbers at Alexandra Palace for weeks and weeks and weeks, months. And we took the whole of the Alexandra Palace and built sort of, corridors and things in there, and filmed it all on our phones to work out exactly where everything was going to be in order to land the lyrics, as well as the choreography, as well as the story.
I spoke to, because I do a magazine for junior film fans as well. And so one of our young interviewers interviewed Alicia Weir, who is, of course, your Matilda. And by God, whoever's her agent is going to make a fortune for the rest of their lives, right? She's but one of the things in that interview was, apart from her talking about the 2-month rehearsal period and the efforts you went to make her, just to make the kids feel settled. I mean, she was hugely complimentary about you all. But her dad was in the background. And her dad, I spoke to her dad afterwards, and he was just absolutely overawed by the physical presence of the film, that so much was built, that so much was done, and that you were doing it like by the sounds of it, completely in camera. And again, I want to go back to the choices that you made on this, because I do think, I mean, Dennis, the stuff that was happening with Utopia, I mean, it's at Den of Geek when Utopia was on, what a show that is. But also the vision that you had when you did Pride. Both of you are fairly strong-willed on what you like. And I just wonder if there was any pushback about going to that level of physicality and that level of building on it.
No, there wasn't. Thankfully, this movie had a big budget because Netflix were prepared to spend on it, which was great. We're enormously grateful for that, because you're always cutting corners to a degree, but the people with the money wanted this film to have scope and scale to it. But not only the costs, and by the way, in the scale that's on screen, of course, because it was shot in COVID, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on.
Yeah.
You say, a lot of it was in camera. More of it could be in camera in other circumstances. For example, in Revolting Children, scene in the lobby, where the whole school seems to arrive at the lobby and people are jumping over the banisters and down the stairs and things like that. And that was 6 passes with a pre-programmed camera, automated, because we couldn't have that number of kids singing and dancing in one space. So they had to be broken down into elements and then layered up afterwards. And you can imagine how complicated that was. So that took much more time than it would normally have taken if you'd just been able to shoot it in camera. And even when we were rehearsing, there were rules about how many kids we could rehearse with at any one time. So it had to be rehearsed again in layers and then assembled. So that's more costly in time and money. And the resources were there to deliver that was really, to that kind of thing, was really great. But I suppose, a broader point is that Dennis and I know the subtext of the story.
Yeah,
we know what's important about it, and so lots of different things can change on the surface. But fundamentally, certain things have to come across. Certain emotions need to be. You need to go on a certain emotional journey. The stakes need to feel at a certain level at different times. And so a lot of the time in the development, when we were being challenged as to whether we needed something to be exactly like that, or when I was shooting or in post, when somebody might challenge you. Yeah. And of course, sometimes you acquiesce and stuff, but a lot of the battles and conversations that we would have where we stay as strong as possible were not because we wanted it to just look like that for the sake of it, because I knew that Revolting Children had to be torrential.
Yes, that's a great word for it.
I used to equate it to, I said to right early on when we were figuring it out, I said Revolting Children has to be like the bit from the Indiana Jones film when they're running down the tunnels and the water is coming at them. But in this particular case, the water is children. Yeah, and I knew that it had to be like that for emotional reasons, not because we were sort of getting off on making just overexcited about making a visually impressive sequence. It is for emotional reasons, and I think that makes it easier to stand your ground and to argue strongly when do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think as well, it's worth saying that there were conversations right at the beginning about, like you talked a lot about there being bodies in the space, and that's really been important. It feels like it's there's you can go one of two ways. You can go CGI and special effects, or you can go the difficult way, which is to get lots of people and build lots of sets. And I think we were clear quite early on that dance, for example, you can, once you sort of CGI dance and once you add bits of CGI to dance, it doesn't look that spectacular because we know as an audience when we're watching it, we know that you can do all these tricks. When you see real kids doing real jumps and real flips, suddenly it becomes extraordinary. But if we had extended that and broken the laws of physics with that, which we could do, post production, the sort of spectacle of what they're actually doing with their bodies is broken down, and actually that sort of philosophy was sort of extrapolated and used throughout the film in a way to sort of make it feel like it's real. I mean, a lot, there are amazing films out there that are hugely CGI dependent, and they can be incredible, but that wasn't what we were making. We wanted something that felt like it was happening in the real world, I think.
And I think coming from a theatre background helps that. So one just other example, if you've got time, if you don't mind.
No, this is interesting.
Is the song Bruce,
yes.
Which I knew I wanted to be set in the canteen. In the stage show, it's just set in a classroom, and I thought that would limit the number of people too much. In order to get the scale of it, we needed to set it in a more crowded place. So we moved it to the canteen, and then there was a whole debate about, can it travel out of the canteen? Because it's a song that it's quite a repetitive song. How can it develop visually? And we had the idea of him being carried out on a chair, Bruce, and made to eat the cake in the playground and stuff like that. We kicked around certain things. This is in development. And then I said, well, why don't we just make the room change? Yeah. And I said, what we could do here is have a triple revolve, which is a very theatrical, stagey idea.
It was Manchurian Candidate as well, isn't it?
Oh, is it? I don't know.
The revolving set in the background. Well, yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah. You're allowed a cinema reference in there.
Okay, right, good. That's better. You saved me. So we had, in order to test that, we had to build a triple revolve in a room somewhere, months, a year before we shot it, I think, and see how it would work. How many kids was too many? How many was the right number? And then the choreography and the way of shooting it obviously turned completely into a 360 approach rather than a proscenium approach. And so that was something that was, you look at that in the film, you think, I wonder if it could have been possible to have CGI'd that motion. But a lot of the things that optically that are happening in that sequence are happening really because it's physically there, and there is the whole floor of the canteen has been rebuilt as a triple revolve for that sequence.
I've also seen stage musicals put on screen where it feels like there's a restriction that you can only go mad, you can only fill your boots on like 2 songs, and everything else has to have a limited number of. And I'm not bad mouthing other musicals. You work within the boundaries of what you've got, right? But there's no that was the boundary that didn't seem to be there. I think it was you and Spielberg with West Side Story, just the feeling that you could kind of go wherever you wanted.
Yeah. I don't think of something that somebody told me that we couldn't do, but I can't remember now.
Well, I almost want to hack your laptop, Dennis. Hearing all the little nuances and little changes that you've done here, and I want to hack it for 2 reasons. Number one, I still want to find out how Utopia ends. But also, I mean, how many drafts were there? How many?
There was a lot. I mean, it's really difficult to tell actually, because what happens is you get to a point where there are big drafts, and then you get to a point where you're rewriting this, and this doesn't work. You're rewriting this, but I would say probably 13, 14, maybe more. What do you think? Does that sound about right?
I don't know.
It's really hard because you're rewriting. You get to a point where you go, oh, it's this. This particular section needs rewriting, but there was a lot of reworking it. It did take quite a bit of work, but
also there were 74 master cuts in the editing. What's it called? Picks.
Right.
Yeah, where you share the things. We got up to master 74. Yeah. So
you're rewriting it in the edit as well.
Even after the drafts, there's another series of things.
Yeah, and that's right. There's also that process of like getting it into the edit, seeing what material you've got, and kind of suddenly realizing that things aren't working. So the editor is rewriting it, and Matthew's rewriting it, and sometimes they'll come back to me and like we'll try and figure a way of making it all work and rewrite certain bits. So it's a very sort of labor intensive process, But I think you just got. I think the good thing is that it felt like we were willing to, that like you said before, there wasn't things that were sacred about the show, and we'd have to we knew we were making something new.
So Tim Minchin once gave an interview about the writing of the putting together of the original musical, where he basically said the three of you disagreed about everything, and the reunion of the three of you.
These interviews. It's so funny dawns on me that an interview is permanent.
Yeah, you must never ever say anything in an interview. What are we doing here? It's crazy.
It's odd, actually. I've just listened to an interview with a major film star, and he talks about how there's a reason people are only asked 6 questions in interviews. And it's because primarily you only want to answer 6 questions, because otherwise, if you're asked something you don't want to answer, your answer will follow you forevermore if we're not careful. So with that in mind, who put the giraffe sign in? Because that's my 9-year-old's favourite reference in there.
That was Matthew. He was determined to have a giraffe. In fact, I think this entire film was just an excuse for him to get near a giraffe.
Yeah, so that is my notes coming out, and he made me write giraffe down.
Well, I'll tell you what happened there is that when we had to come up with what would be like a kid's favourite type of school.
Yeah.
And we were just brainstorming, like fairground, things like that. And I said, giraffe, they're feeding a giraffe, somewhere they can feed the giraffe. And we had hot air balloons, and we had a slide. I took that out in the end. But
you did actually have a hot air balloon. Alicia Weir said you sent her up in a hot air balloon in a warehouse.
That's a version of what happened.
Okay.
It's like we were on a soundstage.
Okay.
She was up in a basket high up at the top of the soundstage.
You've terrified her, and that's what she has nightmares about now.
She thought, yeah. Anyway, but then we did a couple of test screenings, which I quite like to do. I did them on Pride early on in the edit, and we did it on here just to get your bearings and see what an audience is making of it all. And a couple of questions that people asked at the end is, I didn't understand why there was a giraffe at the end. And of course, it's a very Roald Dahl thing to have a giraffe, and things like that. But I did realize that it was completely unmotivated. It had just come from my own love of giraffes. So then
that is the interview quote that's going to follow you around. I love giraffes, says Pride and Matilda director.
Anyway, so what I did then is we digitally changed the signs from keep off the grass. I said, let's change it to no giraffes.
And that was your big CG moment to put a giraffe sign in. That's amazing. That's amazing.
By the way, Tim's lying. By the way, I don't remember that we disagreed. That I mean, we disagreed. Like we definitely disagreed on things. But I think by and large,
that's how we were going to work.
Yeah. You got and you fight for. Like I remember with me and Tim, his job is to fight for the songs, my job is to fight for the script. So sometimes you have to sort of tussle around each other. But the thing that was sort of made it all work was it all felt kind of good natured, and it was all in this. Even when it felt emotional, and sometimes it does, because you care about this stuff. You know what I mean? You really care about it. It was always Tim's just a laugh, really. So you don't sort of feel like it's not about ego, you know what I mean? It was never about making the other person feel bad. It was really about trying to get to a good point,
But your interview quote that's going to follow you around now is you just said Tim's a liar. So I've worked out. So we've done 40 minutes, and
I stand by that in the future. I stand by that for the rest of time.
I'll say it at the end rather than at the start. I adored this film. I thought it was magical, and I sat and watched it with my children. I put it on the front cover of one of my magazines as well. And I'm kind of keen to see what the two of you do in film next, because I know theatre is your heart, and I've followed your works back since I was doing Den of Geek stuff. But I think you've captured something here, and there's a real love of cinema underpinning this film. So can you just give us a flavour of when we'll see you next doing a big screen movie before I'm chucked off this call?
Well, hopefully, Dennis, you can just trot out a few films.
There you go.
There you go. That's because they're easy, really.
No, I've got a lot of theatre to catch up on. I'm at the Old Vic, so I'll be definitely focusing on that for a couple of years. And I think for me, both Pride and Matilda were things I cared about enormously, and had an inordinate amount of passion for them. And Matilda particularly sort of had a long gestation period.
Yeah.
By the time it sort of came out, it was almost like a crusade that I was on to do it. So I'm just waiting to find something that I care about that much or close to that, so that I can, that I've got something to reach for and something to really campaign. It's like a campaign making a film, and if you're not completely in love with the material or care about it on a political level or something, then I don't know how you get through it. So I'll be waiting to find out.
Yeah, I think as well, like people when they see it and they see a lot of the reason it's good is because Matthew put his lifeblood into it. I remember seeing Matthew towards the end of it, and he had aged. I don't mind saying that he looked bad. He was looking bad.
These quotes keep coming.
He looked better now. I described him as looking like a vampire having just had a feed. When I saw him after post-production, it looked like the lifeblood was coming back in. But like, I think it's particularly to directors, it's film. There's a reason why we talk about film and directors together, because it just takes so much work from the directors. It's like a huge undertaking that's there at the beginning and right at the end, and I think Matthew's right. You have to really, really care to sort of put that much of your energy into it.
Well, I'm very glad you did. I'm out of time. Matthew Warchus and Dennis Kelly, thank you so much. Thank you.
I love it to talk to you. Cheers.
Take care. Thank you.
And that was the end of my conversation with Matthew Warchus and Dennis Kelly, chatting about Roald Dahl's Matilda the musical that is currently playing in UK cinemas. I'm a huge fan of the film, as you could probably tell by the end. It is also the end of this episode of Film Stories as well. So as always, thank you for listening and thank you for your time. The regular episode of Film Stories will be along in due course. In the meantime, if you want to get more of my waffling, you can find me on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can find the entire Film Stories project at facebook.com/filmstoriesonline. Our website, filmstories.co.uk, updated every weekday with movie news, reviews, features, all sorts of things there. And we've got a shop as well, store.filmstories.co.uk. That's where you can buy all of our print magazines and such like. But I think that's enough for now, isn't it? I'm going to go off and put together your regular episode of Film Stories that will be along in due course. The main thing, as always, is you all look after yourselves and you all take care. I'll be back soon. Until then, the very best. Bye-bye.